Hey, what's up, Rob?
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. Always
Good.
have.
Sorry,
Okay.
I wasn't sure if I could use an iPad for this. So,
No, it only works. I've learned this the hard way already, like a couple different times. So it only lives only work for some reason on the cell. I don't know why you can't also join a live like on your desktop. I'm pretty sure it's an easy way to program it in there so it still all works, but it is what it is. I'll message Mark after this and let him know. Let let him know what's up. Okay, so welcome on. I'm going to do a quick intro and then I'll just kind of let you take over because I'm interested about hearing about your story and navigating the medical system and the insurance system and all of that because it is a concerning topic and honestly, a lot of pretty much I would guess you know better than me, but probably 95% of people that ended up getting cancer never thought in their life they would get it. You know what I mean? It's one of those things you're like, well, that does happen often, but it's most definitely never going to happen to me. And before I let you take over, I'm just going to do a quick introduction. So Rob is a group, for those on the live today, Rob is a group member as well. He's not a former client. I usually do interview former clients here, but I wanted to mix it up because a lot of people in the group do have interesting journeys with their health and challenges. And a lot of times just hearing their story can help, if you do run into the same challenge and hopefully you don't, can help fast track your recovery by not making similar mistakes or just by knowing a system or a way better that could kind of get you from A to B a lot faster. So you guys, I know with cancer and just like with a lot of other health issues, the most common thing is people are like, well, it's never going to happen to me. You know, I'm never going to have a heart attack, although close to 35 to 40% of Americans die from a heart attack. You know, I'm never going to have a big one too is I'm never going to have cancer. But I mean, let's look at the stats. You know, around 50% of Americans develop cancer within their lifetime. So next time you go to lunch, let's say it's you and three other friends, like two of you out of the four will develop cancer, okay? And then typically half of the people, like roughly half the people that do develop cancer end up dying from it. And those statistics are based just on a 5-year time span from when they first were diagnosed with cancer. But at least from my finding, there isn't that much research available in terms of what happens after the 5-year mark. So if a person made it to 5 years and 3 days and ended up dying from cancer, it's not counted as a death from cancer. That person is still considered um, fully recovered or well. And, you know, as a result, around 610 to about 650,000 Americans, depending on your source, end up dying from cancer every single year. And that's with that 5-year statistic as well. So I'm pretty sure if you extend it over the life of the patient, I'm pretty sure it would go up as well. And I know, like I said in the beginning, and this kind of drives me nuts sometimes, is people are like, well, you know, it's never going to happen to me. I'm going to continue to eat poor, work crazy hours, not manage my stress very well. But in my opinion, like not even in my opinion, just you can look up on PubMed.gov a study of prevalence of optimal metabolic health in American adults, and you will see 9 out of 10 American adults right now are metabolically unhealthy. 90%, okay, which opens them up to a myriad of health issues throughout their life, including increasing the chance of developing cancer by a tremendous amount. And also, like another good study is that, like, you know, about 50% of Americans, or a little bit more than 50% of Americans right now, are either full on type 2 diabetic or pre-diabetic. Okay, so in terms of like, I'm healthy and it's not going to happen to me, I'll be honest with you, it's extremely rare to find a truly healthy individual in the US, especially like, for example, when I was giving a lot of corporate lectures, it's almost impossible to find a very truly healthy and balanced individual like working a corporate job, for example. So although a lot of people might not think this would most likely not happen to them, the chances are, because of the way people are living these days, is actually pretty high. So I'm gonna let Rob take over if he's ready. If you need to do something as well, you're welcome to. And I'm going to try to keep up. So I'm very interested in his story. Rob, please introduce yourself and kind of take over from there.
yeah, thanks, Eugene. I appreciate it. That was quite an intro. You really did your research. Um, so yeah, it's super interesting. It's like, you know, it's like a lot of things in life, right? what's the old saying? Life is what happens when you're making other plans, right?
Yeah.
And,
Yes.
you know, that's absolutely what happened with me. I was, one of the reasons I'm in your group is because, I'm very interested in fitness, and I worked at a private gym back at that time here in Hollywood. And, so I was surrounded by fitness, and, it's like what you were saying about not really expecting something like that to happen. I mean, that's the last thing you expect, especially if, you're going to the gym 4 or 5 days a week. With me, I was working, I was working out. I didn't just have one trainer, I had two. And, and we were sort of focused on different things, and my diet was pretty good. I actually had a little meal prep company, and, I'm Italian, so, cooking's in my blood. And so I would cook for people, and obviously myself. I'm vegan, been vegan for 13 years. So I sort of had everything lined up where, it was even easier for me to say, oh, well, this is never going to happen to me. I mean, look at how healthy I am. Look at all the things that I'm doing to prevent it. And, sure enough, boom, one day, and I'll just tell you briefly how it all transpired. Was, one day I started feeling some pain in my shoulder.
Rod, I'm
Yes.
so sorry not to interrupt. I want you to continue, but can you by any chance not tap on the table? Because the
Oh,
mic
sure.
the mic
Yeah.
is picking it up. I don't know if that's going to make it tough for you to
Yeah.
talk because I'm very kind of I have a lot of movement when I'm speaking too. So, but just
Yeah.
so the audio is a little bit more clear
Yeah.
that way.
Absolutely. Sorry about
Anyways,
that.
sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
So yeah, so one day my shoulders and my back started feeling bad, and that's not uncommon when you're doing deadlifts and things like that. Um, that sort of thing happens, and I had a chiropractor that I would see pretty regularly, and I went to her, and she cracked my back, but it wasn't helping. And also, the other thing was that the pain was in a different place than it normally would be, right? If I, overdid it with deadlifts or squats or something, the pain would be in my lower back. But this was up here. It was up
Mm,
in my shoulders. I thought that was weird, but, again, I didn't think much of it. And what ended up happening was, I went out one day with my dog. That's who you probably heard barking a minute ago. Um, and he's like a puppy. He's a boxer, so he's automatically crazy. And he sees another dog on the street, pulls on the leash, and boom, that's when it really got bad. So I ended up at urgent care. They found that my blood pressure, because obviously when they do an intake in urgent care, they're going to take your vitals. My blood pressure was at stroke levels. So they rushed me to the hospital. And, they were, nobody could sort of figure out what was going on until obviously CAT scans and all of that. So it turned out I had a tumor in my neck, inside my spine. So that's how it transpired. But man, I'll tell you, hearing that news that you have cancer, the thing that struck me almost immediately was, um, okay, you have two ways that you could potentially deal with this, right? You could do what I think a lot of people do, which is they sit back and they go, oh, why me, right? Why would this happen to me? I'm doing all the right things, everything I was saying. Or you could sit back and go, you know what? I'm just not gonna. I'm gonna beat this, and I'm gonna make sure that I'll do everything my doctors tell me to do, and at the same time, I'm gonna try to have the best possible attitude that I can have, for the process. And so, that's what I did. My doctor, I'll never forget, my doctor came in and told me, sort of what the treatment plan was going to be. and he said it was going to be 4 to 6 rounds of chemo, right? But of course, what do you think I heard when he said that? I heard four. I didn't hear the sixth part. And so, obviously what ended up happening was I get to the fourth round of chemo and he's already talking about the fifth. And I'm sitting there going, wait a minute. We already determined there's no cancer left. Everything looks good in the tests. So why do I need to have a fifth? Why do I need to have a sixth? And I was upset by that, obviously. But again, it forced me to think again about how I can choose to deal with this, right? It felt like a setback. And, that seemed to be the whole theme of this whole thing was that it was, it ended up just being one big setback. Now, the good news about it, I know this is going to sound weird, but it actually turned out, all of this happened in the height of COVID.
Hmm.
So, that actually turned out to be a good thing for a lot of reasons, right? Because it was kind of like I was already not working that much because of COVID. I was sort of doing, I'd lost my job like everybody else, and trying to do, things here and there. But what it meant was, I was getting assistance, and so, I remember thinking, geez, if this had happened at any normal time, I would have been screwed because I didn't have like, you know, I I was always the one, when you talk to your HR department and they're talking about, spending this amount of money every paycheck on disability. I was like, what do I need that for? Right? I'm never gonna get.
Hmm.
So, you know, it ended up being not the case. So in that way, I really, really lucked out. Um, so yeah, I mean that's essentially what happened, and ultimately after that, it was really, all about recovery and kind of coming back from that. This all started in December of 2020. So I'm technically recovered, but in a lot of ways, I'm still bouncing back from it. In just about every way you can imagine.
Well, when the doctors gave you the diagnosis of having the tumor, did they give you any other options outside of chemo, or is chemo like the go-to plan for pretty much all cancers these days?
Yeah, no, they didn't. I mean, it was kind of weird because the first person I saw was actually a radiologist. So this was somebody who was talking about radiation. And then the oncologist came in and he was talking about chemotherapy. And in some ways, looking back at it now, it's kind of funny. I feel like the oncologist kind of won that battle just out of sheer will, right? Like he was the more sort of aggressive, the more like, no, 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 this is how it's going to go. This is what we're doing, and immediately took charge, took complete control over the plan, whatever the plan was going to be, and so radiation became like, oh, you don't need that. So it's a little strange, something again I wasn't expecting. But yeah, chemotherapy won out, and it's a good thing it did because ultimately that's what saved me.
Well, can you go over kind of your experience of getting chemo, if that affected your health or what you noticed during the process?
Yeah, absolutely. So chemotherapy is not what it used to be, right? Everybody thinks chemotherapy is this horrible thing where you're going to lose your hair, you're going to be sick all the time, you're not going to be able to eat, all of that kind of stuff. Well, the hair part turns out is still true. I did lose all of my hair. Um, but the other parts are not necessarily true, right? I think that one of the things that we forget, um, especially when it comes to our own, health, is there's like this disconnect between the fact that, okay, we have this impression of what chemotherapy is, but then what we're not factoring in is that that impression may have been formed 10 years ago or 20 years ago when you first had a family member or something going through chemotherapy. And in the meantime, 10 years have passed, 20 years have passed. And, technology has kept up, science has kept up, and things are different than they were back then. So, I was told by the oncologist, I'm not sure if I believed him at first, but it actually turned out to be pretty true. I never got sick. I was eating just fine. In fact, I was eating too good because I put on a little weight during chemo, which, again, counterintuitive to what I think most people know. So chemo wasn't that bad. What was hard was, well, first of all, hearing that I had to go through 6 rounds as opposed to 4, that was difficult. And I've got a really cool story about how I got through that, but I'll come back to that. But the part that was probably more difficult than even the chemo itself was the recovery, right? So it was what happened after chemo. Because again, I think you come into it with all kinds of expectations. Yes.
Rob, how do the rounds work? Are they like boom, 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 like back to back, or they do one and then like maybe give you a month or two, then do another scan, see how the tumor is progressing, then like determine if another one is necessary? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so it's 3 weeks in between.
Got it.
So around, and for me, the way, so chemo's different for everybody, right? It's really all it is a combination of drugs. And a good oncologist sort of knows, okay, if the cancer's here and it's at this stage, then you're going to get this combination. But if it's over there in this other part of the body and it's at this stage, it's going to be a completely different, regimen. So for me, what ended up happening was mine was a whole 6 days, I believe, in a row, right, where I had to be in the hospital for at least this is all part of the story about 5 and 6, but for 1 through 4, I had to be in the hospital that whole week. So for a week, I was in a hospital, and then 3 weeks would go by with nothing, back in the hospital again, and they would check intermittently or whatever. And ultimately, what happened was after the 4th was when I had the CAT scan to show how I was progressing. And that CAT scan actually showed that the cancer was completely gone.
Hmm.
So I'm thinking, woohoo, this is great, I'm done. No, not so much.
Got 2 more rounds.
I got, but again, when he said 4 to 6, I was like, okay, so 4, right? Because that's what you want to hear. So, for me, it was like, when I heard that it was going to be 6, I was very, very upset. And but the oncologist put it in a great perspective for me. He's like, look, we could stop now because technically the cancer is gone, or we could do 2 more just to be absolutely sure, just so you don't have to worry a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, that it's going to come back, right? Where I can't guarantee that's going to be the case if we stop now.
Hmm.
So, that's what made it a little more palatable to go to 5 and 6. But I'll tell you what I did was, and this is the thing that I think people also don't really understand about, the medical industry in this country, is you really have to be an advocate for yourself. And, obviously spending a lot of time in the hospital, I was doing a lot of research, and I found out, it turns out that the therapy that I was on could actually be done at home. It was a little more complicated and a little more expensive, and I don't think the hospital pretty much, I didn't think they liked it very much because, they lose a little bit of control or whatever. But I was like, if this can be done and I can do this at home, I want that, right? And so, it sort of was like, that was the deal I made with the oncologist to, you know, kind of get over, having to go through 2 more rounds.
I find, I don't know if you found this with in your situation, but I find the internet can be like a very easy double-edged sword
Yeah,
because you have like this one very credible expert saying one thing on that same exact issue. And on
yeah,
the other side of the table, you have like another extremely credible expert saying completely the opposite. I don't know if you
yeah.
kind of also just ran into that. Like, dude, what do I do? You know, do I even need to go through all these? Some people would even say you don't even need to do any of that, and the cancer will like kind of heal itself, or it wouldn't do anything for you long term, anyways. You know?
Yeah, I got that. Obviously, you get all kinds of advice and, oh, well, my cousin did this or my uncle did that, and this really worked for him and all of that. But look, at the end of the day, it's your life, and you have to make the decisions, right? It's like,
Hmm.
you know, all of a sudden you find yourself having to put on those big boy pants and really make tough calls for yourself. So at least for me, what whenever I had to do any research online, I just made sure that the source was very credible, right? So it was like, American Cancer Society. I realize there's political stuff in there, and so you take everything with a grain of salt. But that's way more credible than my friend Joe from Oklahoma and his cousin's uncle, right?
Hmm.
So it's you have to make these calls, and so you really find yourself in a position where you're having to do things that you never had to do, right? I always looked at I always looked at wellness, right? So being in the fitness industry, working at a HIIT gym, private training gym, I was all about wellness, right? Even owning my own, meal prep company. Every day of my life, all the research, everything that I was doing was about how to be well, how to stay well, and how to get even better, right? It was never about sick. It was never about being sick or getting over sickness. That's what, CVS pharmacy is for. You get a cold, you go and you grab some NyQuil or whatever, right? And so it was a shift, right? Because now all of a sudden I had to do more research and find out what it meant to be ill. And that was new to me.
Hmm. Well, what is it like? Were you able to work during this time? I know you said you weren't working, but if a person does have to work, I mean, like, are they able to work while doing all this, or?
Well, today especially, right? Most people are working from home. So, if you can kind of get like, if you can figure out a way to do some of your treatment at home, or even if you do have to do it in hospital, the hospital has a really good Wi-Fi network, and you know, so yeah, there's ways of working at home, which that was actually just starting to take hold when this was early 2021. So it was like very much in the midst of COVID. Um, and I think by this point, everybody was used to Zooms and, all that kind of stuff. So, but to be honest with you, it's an interesting question because like, I, I don't know if it would have been the same had it taken place a year before or 2 years before. Would my employer have let me work from home rather than coming into the office? But now it's just like, you know, the difference was my background instead of being this for a Zoom was the back of my hospital bed.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. Well, I
see,
presume just like with the healing process, I mean, it's ideal just to rest completely, especially not be under the stress of like a job, for example.
yeah,
Not all jobs are stressful, but most are pretty stressful for most people. And I'm
yeah,
sure that will lower just like the overall health of your immune system and your ability to recover faster. Not saying you can't recover, but I'm saying it's just another obstacle that's staying in your way when that's present.
yeah, absolutely. Look, I at the end of the day, I had I had sort of a part-time job at the time. I was working for um, this local company. It was like kind of a startup. Um, and my boss and I did not get along even before all of this. So now that I'm in the hospital and having to take time off when it wasn't convenient for him, it made things even more stressful. So I actually ended up quitting my job. But I
Hmm.
had the luxury of doing that because, it was COVID and, I could just very easily go back on unemployment, right? So I realized that most people don't have that luxury. But look, at the end of the day, one of the things that I realized was that, like I said before, you have to become an advocate for yourself, right? You have to figure out ways um, of prioritizing you getting well, as opposed to whatever it is going on in your life, whether that's work, family, whatever. And again, that's something we're not used to either, right? Most people take care of other people, right? Whether it's kids or wives, husbands, whatever. It's it's in our culture that that's how we operate. And so it's not very natural. I think people would be surprised how hard it is to make that jump from, okay, now all of a sudden I have to take care of myself. I have to put myself first. So in the situation with my job, that made it an easy decision to quit because it was like, well, you
Sucks
know,
anyways.
yeah, I can't I can't have this stress in my life and then
Hmm.
expect to be getting well.
Yeah,
So
I can
yeah,
tell you've been in the wellness industry when you're talking about putting your mental and physical health as a top priority above any, because you, and like you said, uh, you pretty much rarely hear that. Maybe one out of every 100 people would kind of follow that philosophy, and maybe even fewer would follow it down to the T, like really make it a concrete part of their life. But I
yeah,
always tell people, like, dude, you have to, at the end of the day, if you want anything to last long term and you don't want to be miserable in the process, you have to put yourself first.
yeah,
Because if you don't, you're just going to go disgruntled in that relationship or that job situation that's not meeting your needs. It might not happen right away, but it's going to catch up to you and happen eventually. And then once that kind of disconnect happens, it's very stressful on the central nervous system. And that's going to, over time, in order for you to cope with that, lead to various maladaptive behaviors like poor lifestyle and nutritional choices that are going to lead to various health complications. For some people, it could just be excess body fat. Other people could be heart issues, cancer for some people, even, et cetera, et cetera. But I always tell people, like, dude, you got to put yourself first because at the end of the day, also, um, you could only give as much love as you have. Just like
right.
with income, you could only give as much to charity as you have yourself. So if you don't have that much to give, uh, it's just not going to work out long term, anyways. But maybe that explains why 9 out of 10 American adults right now are metabolically unhealthy, and
Mhm.
they'll look at. I'm sure you've run into this many times. They'll look at you straight in the eye and say, "I feel completely fine." You know, um, just because, I mean, it's kind of a little bit mean to say, but I think just pathology has been normalized in our culture, unfortunately.
Well, and there's also, let's talk about the disconnect there, right? There's this disconnect that exists between, everything that you just said, right? I think in our heads, right, we understand it. We even go, you know what? That makes sense. I get it. I understand. But yet it's not I at least for me, it took something like this to happen to really let it sink in. So let me give you an example of that, right? What you said about the central nervous system, right? I've heard that before. Yeah, I heard that before having cancer. But I didn't realize, and sort of when you're going through chemo and you have chemicals running.
Oh, I think the audio went off on you, Rob. I don't know if you can hear me. Is someone calling? You can swipe up on them to kind of cancel the call. It's good. We'll wait a little bit. No big deal. Oh, yep, perfect. Was someone
Oh,
calling? I'm just curious. Was someone
yeah.
calling? That
What's that?
happens to me too. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, for some. Anyways, no big deal.
No,
Uh, Go ahead.
so another reason why they should allow you to do this on an iPad or something,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, because you
Uh,
can't quite turn off the do not disturb thing when you have the Wi-Fi thing on, anyways. So
right? It makes it difficult. So, But what I was saying was, there is this disconnect where you can, especially, I'm sure you understand this as a personal trainer. You can tell people things 100 times, but if it doesn't pair, if it doesn't match with their own experience, they can understand it logically, but it's very hard to let that sink in. So I would hear something about how, you know, whatever, like even okay, so doing deadlifts, right? Like if you go too heavy or do too many deadlifts, that could have an effect on your central nervous system. I never really, believed that, right? Or I believed it because, an expert told me that, but it wasn't until I experienced having gone overboard one time, and I won't even go into what the next couple of days were like after that, but it was very much my central nervous system had a reaction to that. And it was the same thing when it came to the stresses, the regular everyday stresses, and how they were affecting me
Hmm.
while I had cancer and while I was going through chemotherapy. Everything was heightened,
Hmm.
right? And so I could actually feel those the types of things that I'm sure you describe all the time to clients, the things to look out for, the things to avoid. I could feel them. They were sort of real time, right? And that was a big wake up call for me. So in a lot of ways, I mean, I learned a lot from this experience. It was great. One other thing I wanted to address, something that you said about, sort of, your well being and taking care of yourself. You know, there, there was also the part about um, feeling bad for yourself, right? And I tried not to do that. Like I said at the beginning, from the diagnosis, from the very day I was diagnosed, um, all the way through the end, I thought I did a pretty good job of staying positive, right, and being upbeat. But when I got that news about having to go through 2 more rounds of chemo that I wasn't expecting, I mean, I had already, I was planning my life beyond that, right? I was already planning, and now everything was set back for another 2 months. I was pissed. I was upset. And so, an interesting thing that I did was, I thought to myself, okay, I have to figure out how to get myself out of this state because, again, being in that state, that's a form of stress.
Hmm.
I wasn't feeling well, and all of a sudden, it was like I was feeling the effects of things because I was holding on to that stress. So, interesting experiment, which is something that I still do to this day sometimes, is I thought maybe the best way to get out of my own um, experience is to try to help people with their experience, whatever their bad experience is. So for me, what that was I went on Facebook and I started scrolling, and probably every fifth post was about something negative happening in somebody's life, and
I'm
so I
surprised it's only every fifth with you. It's like every
right
other one.
I know
You're being too optimistic now.
yeah.
You know.
But but what I did was I commented on all of those and then even got into, messenger discussions and tried to uplift um, these people. And before you know it, I was probably maybe a half hour into this process, this intentional process. I forgot all about it. I forgot all about it. Not to mention the fact that I felt good because I was helping other people and all of that. But wow, that was that was one of the coolest things that I learned, and I still do that to this day. If I get upset about something or if something negative is happening, you know, it's like there's always something, there's always something either equally as bad happening to somebody else or worse, and you can support that, right? And the minute you get into that, there's no room to remember what's going on with you, right? So anyway, I thought that was probably one of the biggest things that I learned out of this whole thing. Something that still, goes on to this day.
Well, can you talk about in terms of like how insurance works uh,
Yeah.
and that kind of background? Because I know like the one thing that attracted me from your post is like I think you took a screenshot or maybe just wrote out the bill for the medical bill and it was like close to 1 million or maybe a little bit over $1 million, which isn't
Yeah.
surprising to me. I mean, medical costs can go like from zero to like a trillion in like seconds, you know, and a lot of people don't like factor that in until they land in an emergency situation of some sort.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, people don't realize just, like when you get your medical insurance, right? One of the first things you talk about is, what's your deductible going to be, right?
Mhm.
What's the copay going to be? All of those kinds of things. But what, perhaps you don't think about, right? Especially if you feel like something like this is unlikely to happen. Um, what you didn't think about is how fast all that adds up, right? The deductibles, the copays, all of that kind of stuff. And so, imagine my shock, um, getting a bill in the mail it was actually just over $1 million. And, you know, of course, yeah, that's like the ultimate sticker shock, right? And I did have insurance through the whole thing, right?
Mhm.
I kind of started with, okay insurance, and then um, but that was in December, and so January was coming up, and I knew now that this was going on, I had better move over to a much better plan, but my premiums doubled,
How does
literally.
that work if the company knows that you're already going through some treatment? Are they open to giving you like an upgraded program? Or are they resistant to that?
Well, I mean, since Obamacare, they can't refuse you
Okay,
for
got it.
a condition. So it's really a matter of, like in my case, I went from, sort of like a network plan that was, sort of very in network. Everything had to be in network,
Hmm.
uh, to something where it was like I could do whatever I want, right? I could go to any doctor, go to any hospital, whatever. So I went from that limited plan to a more extensive plan, but it was twice the cost. And so I had to worry about, the, you know, how much it would cost every month, um, without realizing, that like, how is this other stuff going to add up? And I don't know, maybe it's an intentional thing on the hospital's part. Like maybe they don't want to burden you too much with the medical bills while you're going through it. So it was like I didn't get that bill until after. It's like, okay, great, we got you all well, and you're cancer free now. So here you go. Here's the remainder, $1 million. But again, I just again, one of the biggest things that I'm grateful for is that all of this happened during COVID. And as a result of COVID not working and having sporadic work and whatever, I ended up, you know, qualifying for all kinds of financial programs to get it taken care of. And so Cedar Sinai Hospital here in LA, 100% of it was covered. Um, so I didn't, I was fortunate enough to not be out a penny. But that didn't uh, that didn't help with the shock of that day when I opened that envelope. I'll tell you that much.
Do you mind if I ask? I mean, you don't have to share like how much was your like monthly insurance plan, just so the audience gets a general idea if they're looking to also get a plan that would have sufficient coverage, how much they would be looking to pay.
Well, so I went from like $600 to like $1,200,
Mm,
uh,
mm,
because I ended up, I was just like, I need the best possible plan I could get. And also, I didn't want to think too much about it. I just kind of went all the way to the bottom of the Blue Cross Blue Shield website and said, okay, what's the most expensive? That's the one I want, right? Because I knew this was coming up, right? And I knew I had to be as covered as I possibly could be. Um, I was in the midst of the situation, right? I don't think when people are making buying decisions on insurance, they're necessarily in the midst of that most times.
mhm.
So, there was probably something I could have done. that would have cost a little bit less. Maybe would have been more than the $600 a month, but not as much as 1,200, right? Um, and so again, it's just a matter of doing your homework and finding the right plan. Interestingly enough, one of the things that COVID has sort of changed in the medical world is, there are companies now, healthcare companies, that sort of act like, because so many people are 1099 as opposed to W-2 employees, right?
Hmm.
So, not getting a regular paycheck, um, and getting health insurance through their employer. There's companies like Clearwater, for example, um, that work with 1099 employees, right? So if you're like an Uber driver and you're doing that full time, you can work with a company something like a Clearwater and get similar rates. Now, of course, Uber isn't gonna, subsidize your policy in the same way that your employer would, a W-2 employer would. But you do end up with, sort of those preferred rates because you're in a much larger pool, um, to get the best rates, just in the same way that employer-based healthcare works. So it's an interesting thing to look into, and I think because a lot of people now are, very much in that 1099 world, right? You hear about, people leaving, corporate jobs all the time, and so I think these things are going to get more and more, which means more and more competition, better prices, etc.
Gotcha. Well, not to, I guess not to bring it up because it might be a little bit negative, but have you thought about like the reoccurrence of cancer and any kind of steps
Oh,
you'd have to take to make sure you keep screening and make sure it's not coming back? Because I know
yeah.
like that's probably one problem is like, oh, it could be treated, but then 3, 4, 5 years later, it could very well come back as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always a worry, but again, it is one of those things where the more you worry about things, um, it's ironic. The irony is you then make yourself more susceptible to them,
Hmm.
right? Worry's not going to help you in any way, shape, or form. So, look, at the end of the day, the best thing that you can do is to just follow the treatment regimen. And I'm still on a treatment regimen in that I have to go once a year to get checked. And, if it comes back, then I'll deal with it at that time, right? But it's. I think you mentioned this at the beginning of the live that, um, after 5 years, that's when you get sort of considered cancer free, right? So you're not supposed to use the word cured until the 5 year mark, right?
Hmm.
You can say remission, you can say cancer free, you can say things like that, but you're not officially cured until 5 years. So, I just have to go now once a year, get a PET scan. They'll check to see if it's there, but I'll tell you, I feel great. So, you know, I'm just not worried about it.
What's your best guess? I know there's so many variables that lead to cancer formations of various sorts, but if you
Hmm.
had to summarize your best guess and your theory of why a person gets cancer, and I know cancer is a very broad
Yeah.
umbrella term too. I'm just trying to simplify it here. What's your take with all the research you've done and kind of your best hypothesis?
Well, I mean, look, at the end of the day, what cancer is just, the body producing cells that are bad cells, right? As opposed to producing good cells. Um, so, if you get lung cancer, the body's producing lung cells that are defective per se. And if you're like me, if you believe that your attitude, the stress in your life, or whatever has your nervous system, your central nervous system, and how you take care of that has a direct effect on what kind of cells get produced within your body, then the answer is simple, right? You avoid stress, you avoid, you do everything that you can to stay healthy. I mean, of course, there's going to be, genetic types of cancer that, potentially are unavoidable. But even then, you can do things
Hmm.
about it, right? We've all heard the story of, Angelina Jolie, for example, getting like proactive double mastectomies because she has breast cancer in her family,
Hmm.
right? So it was sort of an extreme step that she took, but it's not uncommon, right? People will do that, and so again, it kind of goes back to this whole thing about advocating for your own health. And if you know that there's the genetics that are against you, then figure out, learn the ways that you can be proactive. No, it's not going to be successful 100% of the times, but maybe you can push it off for another 10 years, right?
Hmm.
Get, a quality of life that, you wouldn't have otherwise had you not, done a little bit of research and taken some proactive measures. And then, of course, it's eat right, get plenty of sleep, um, make sure that you're mentally okay. All of those things are contributing factors, I believe, to cancer. Like for me, for example, there was a lot going on in my life at the time when this happened. I honestly believe that um, this was, a stress cancer for me, right? That because there isn't, believe it or not, in my family a lot of cancer.
Hmm.
Yeah, more like heart disease, diabetes, things like that in my family. Like that's the genetic stuff that my brothers and sisters worry about. But for me, all of a sudden getting cancer was kind of like, wow, that's you know. So it had to be something else, right? And as much as I was doing between working out and and eating right, um, having a vegan diet, all of that, even all of that wasn't enough um, to sort of alleviate or offset the stress factors that I believe contributed to my illness.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning into the podcast. I'm curious, have you ever been confused by the labels in the grocery store? In Yevgeny's book, he demystifies the difference between caged, cage-free, free-range, and pasture-raised meats. He also covers how to avoid GMOs, source high-quality water, fish, supplements, and other related topics. It's a beautifully illustrated, non-technical read that comes with a comprehensive video series and other extended learning materials. Jump on Amazon and check out the book titled Anti-Factory Farm Shopping Guide by Eugene Trufkin. Now let's dive back into the podcast.
Yeah, I really believe like the two factors that well, first of all, like in terms of what you said, and like mastering the basics will dramatically decrease. I mean, World Health Organization just mentioned that. Like, I think I remember reading a report, just simply not being overweight,
Mm-hmm.
meaning like for a male, like somewhere between 12-15% body fat is a good range to kind of hover around, maybe 10 for some people, and simply not smoking, not drinking alcohol, and also just eating kind of like a whole food organic diet already just decreases your chances of all cancers by 50%.
Yep.
So, I mean, just right there, it's like very, very basic stuff. And unfortunately, I know you've been in the health and wellness field. A lot of people just say, well, I'm doing that, but well, they're really not. Maybe one day out of the week, they really are living true to those principles. But then, they're working like 50, 60, 70-hour weeks under a lot of like financial pressures, eating even if they're eating semi well, like during the week, they're eating very poorly on the weekend.
Right.
Um, Most often in the wrong relationships, in the wrong occupation for themselves, which increases those micro stressors a tremendous amount. And I know I mentioned this a lot on lives before, but it's like the human central nervous system hasn't evolved well to deal with chronic micro stresses in a person's life. And I feel, in especially American society, kind of dismiss those. It's like, oh, well, it's traffic, it's annoying, but I can live with it. Oh, it's like an annoying boss. He's annoying, but I could live with it. oh, my job, it's like super stressful, but whatever, I'll live with it. You know what I mean? Or, especially if you're living in a city, there's inevitably a lot of pollution. That's adding stress to the human body as well.
Yeah.
Then, I mean, look, the average newborn born in a metropolitan area in America is born with trace amounts of 200 different synthetic chemicals in their bloodstream already. And that's
Wow.
just how they're starting life at 200.
Yeah.
And it's like, you don't need a study to understand that it's better
Right.
not to have that many chemicals brewing and marinating your body 24/7. And I feel like there's also just a lot of misunderstanding in terms of how safe various cosmetic items are, on the counter, even at CVS. They're like, well, if it's sold there, or, maybe this food I'm buying at, yeah, maybe this food I'm buying at the grocery store, although it's not organic, it's okay. But a lot of people don't understand. It's like, especially with synthetic pesticides, which are used on your food, like the complete formulation of the products are never tested for safety before they're
Right.
sprayed on your food. They just test like the active ingredient in isolation on its own, where the
Hmm.
average consumer thinks like, well, they're taking the complete formulation, spraying it on the crop, then testing it for safety. No, man, they take the formulation completely apart. They just take the active ingredient in isolation, test that for safety on its own. But it's silly because the inactive ingredients in the chemical formulation are there to make the active ingredient stronger and more persistent in the environment, so it has a higher chance of killing the pests or whatever they're spraying it on there for. And it's like, science is great, but oftentimes in the real world, nothing works in isolation. Like in any crop production cycle, the crop is being exposed to a myriad of different complete formulations all at the same time, not like
Yeah.
just a single active ingredient of one formulation at the same. So a lot of people are like, well, it's like, it's not a big deal. It's tested for safety. And I'm like, dude, it's a big deal, especially when I read those numbers. Like I mentioned, 50% of Americans develop cancer within their lifetime, and 9 out of 10 American adults are metabolically unhealthy now. I mean, clearly it's time to accept that the current system and path of life is not sustainable and not leading to happiness and wellness in the American population. And that's it. Just the results speak for themselves at the end of the day, you know?
I know. I know it's probably cliche at this point, but we really do have a sick care system in this country. It's not a healthcare system. I know we call it a healthcare system, but it's not. Everything is reactionary, and and it takes something like this before you really understand just how true that is, right? I mean, just think about, chemo itself, right? All the money, the research, everything, all of the, advancements that have been made, right? To kind of get to where we are. Remember, I was talking earlier about how, everybody has this impression of chemo where you're going to get sick and you're going to be in bed the whole time. And it wasn't like that. And it's not really like that anymore for, a lot of cancers. Well, that took years and years and years and, probably millions of dollars, billions of dollars in research to get there. But at the same time, how much money was spent in these sort of same, sort of scientific processes that were regulated by the FDA and government agencies? How much money was spent to prevent the cancer from happening in the first place? And when you think about it, it's so true, right? Who's putting up that money? It's the drug companies. Who's putting up, who's got the interest to make sure that there's always plenty of patients and the rooms are full, like like a hotel, right? You got to have an occupancy rate at the hospital, right? It's a big business, especially when I'm looking at 6 months, not even 6 months of treatment. It's over $1 million just for my part, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not even including the insurance part. So it just goes to show you how much money is there. Well, whenever there's that kind of money, there is no interest
Yeah.
in moving to something else, some other system. And that's a problem for us. That's why we end up reacting to everything and not doing enough to be proactive.
So really quick, just to clarify, the $1 million, was that just what you're responsible with after the insurance covered all that other stuff?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Okay, man, that makes it even more terrifying because for some reason, I kind of misread your previous post a long while back. I just thought that was the total sum and the
No,
insurance covered all of that.
the math, right? Like if my copay, right, was 20%, let's say, I don't remember exactly what it was, but probably right around there. Then what's $1 million 20% of? That's just what my treatment cost, right? For 6 months. Just to give you an idea, Eugene, there's this shot that you have to get right after you're done with each round of chemo. And now you're not supposed to get it until 24 hours after, they take the IV out, right? So, you're in the hospital, they take out the IV, there you go. That starts the clock of 24 hours, right? And then in the old days, what would happen is you'd have to go back to the hospital the next day and get this shot. It was crucial. I don't really understand too much about the science of it, of why you needed it, but you do need it every time after a round of chemo. Well, the technology that they developed, which is super interesting, is they basically made the shot like a robotic shot. So they put this little robot on my arm. They basically just sort of tape it down. And then 24 hours later, you'd hear click, 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 and you'd get, a little prick into your arm. And so basically what they did was they automated this shot for the convenience that I wouldn't have to drive. It takes me 7 minutes to get to the hospital, right? So for me to save that 7 minutes drive each way, so let's call it 14 minutes, they developed this technology. That technology, that one shot was $70,000. 70
Damn.
grand. And I had to have 6 of them.
Yeah, that's
right?
crazy.
So I mean, right there, and it was, and again, it is because there's so much money that goes into the research and development, the R&D, to kind of get to do this. And this wasn't even like a 100% necessary thing, right? It wasn't crucial. I mean, it was really just to save people the inconvenience of having to go to the hospital the next day. It's just crazy how much money goes into it. And so, if you think about it from that perspective, it's like, okay, yeah, the $1 million really starts making sense, right? Or 20 million or whatever it was. But look, I mean, the original point was that we, why don't we put more? Why don't we invest more into what can be done at the beginning, right? Into, people's mental health so that they don't end up with those stressors that can cause cancer. Into, more like, there was a time years ago where, you might get a job and they pay for your gym membership. I mean, how many people have that anymore, right? But the point is, we only spend a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the kind of money that we spend on sick care on actual wellness. Yeah. And so, I think that's why a lot of us end up in the situations that we were in.
Yeah, I think eventually it's going to be a financial disaster for the US, especially when I mentioned like 9 out of 10 Americans are metabolically unhealthy. Can you imagine the cost? And also when a person's really sick, they're not working and paying taxes.
Yeah.
There's that aspect of it as well. And I always said, in terms of like what you're kind of talking about here, they're investing, the government is investing, or you know what, I kind of lost the politics of what exactly is happening with the universal healthcare coverage. But basically it's like, here's the thing. So first of all, this universal healthcare coverage is extremely expensive. It's extremely expensive mainly because it just relies on the medical system for treatment, which is, like you just mentioned, extremely expensive, and
Right.
a symptom management approach. It's just kind of like putting out the fires instead of figuring out how just not to start the fire to begin with.
Yeah.
And I always thought, like, dude, if they just took like a very small fraction of that expenditure and diverted it to thoroughly educating kids elementary school through high school, college isn't even necessary, in my opinion, on at least gaining an expert level understanding of how to use movement as medicine, what
Yeah.
real organic food is, how to have
Yeah.
nonviolent forms of communication, how to identify your core values so you're actually living your life in alignment with how you want to live it. That alone will just dramatically improve the quality of people's life altogether. You know, like how to sleep properly, just how to even identify your core values, so then that way you can kind of pursue that in your life and get your life to actually mirror those core values, which are a reflection of you.
Yeah.
And ironically, if they just did that, like almost no one will use the hospital or the medical system unless it's a real true emergency. So you could actually then have universal healthcare coverage, and it's actually far more affordable that way.
Right. Right.
Everyone gets covered, and everyone ironically is way healthier
Right.
that way as well.
First place, and then what you end up with having to deal with from a reactive standpoint are the emergencies, right? Car accidents, things like that, right? Yeah. So, but it's systemic, right? If you know any doctors, right, they'll all tell you the same thing about nutrition, for example. They get almost no training in all those years of medical school. They get almost no training on nutrition. And, I mean, with everything that we're finding out now about, you know, carcinogens in meat and, all kinds of the ways that food, sugar, fat, salt, that whole sort of classic American combination, how all of that has such an impact in our lives. You think going to the doctor knows everything about your health and about your wellness. And so you would expect that they'd be able to inform you on how to stay well and how to use nutrition to stay well. They know just as much, if not less, than you do, because they've maybe had one class in their entire med school career that was about nutrition. That to me seems crazy, right? Yeah. That to me seems insane, especially when food is such a contributing factor to the health and the well-being of people, right? And so that's what I mean by being systematic. It's like, if you're not going to train doctors and you're not going to encourage them to care or even incentivize them to care about making them obsolete, right, making themselves obsolete, then you're only going to wind up sort of deeper in this hole that you describe, right? And then the vicious cycle continues. So it's not until we change the entire paradigm of how we think about not just sick care, but A, healthcare, and B, even before healthcare, wellness, and staying well and being well and taking on that personal responsibility of maintaining your wealth. I mean, your health.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Your wealth too, but your
Yeah.
health especially, right?
Yeah, and I find the symptom management model is an easy sell because it provides false hope for a lot of people. And because at the end of the day, I mean, you've been in wellness for a long time. I forgot the philosopher that said this. I think it was Hippocrates or Aristotle, but he mentioned, don't provide a cure to a person unless you ask them first if they're willing to change the behavior that led to the problem.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I think once they realize, like, dude, you have to do this to actually genuinely be healthy, they'll come to the realization like, look, man, I can't sit in front of a computer 8 to 10 hours a day and
Right.
expect to optimize my health. I can't keep eating this fast food and drinking alcohol on the weekend and buying like the cheapest possible food I can find at Costco, all the time or whatever, anywhere else,
But,
I can't continue to
but
be in this relationship or this
it,
job.
it goes back to that disconnect though, right? Until something happens to you, you can think about that kind of stuff logically. It's just it's very difficult to make the leap to actually manifesting that and
Yeah.
act living that because you don't have the experience of of knowing how true it really is, right? That how important wellness is, how important it is to eat right, to exercise, to do all of those things. It's all it's an intellectual exercise up until that point. And so that's the piece to me that is the hardest, I think, is how do you get past that disconnect where you can make it make it real enough that it's going to motivate the change that's necessary. And that's the part I have no idea. I don't know the answer to that.
Well, unfortunately, most people just they'll have to experience a lot of pain in their life before
Yeah.
they say enough is enough.
Yeah.
That's sometimes I wonder too. I'm like, man, like maybe I'm just a sissy because I don't know how the average person lives with so much pain in their life 24/7 and is okay with getting up in the morning and having to take like Xanax, 3 Red Bulls, a coffee, just to be able to have the energy to wash the dishes in the morning. I'm like,
Right.
how can you live like this and find this acceptable? Because it's like, I like when I was working 6 days a week, long while back, I wasn't even having serious health complications, but I just didn't feel like I was optimizing my health, and that was enough for me to basically go to 3 days a week and then eventually go to 2 days a week, 100% remote.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was already enough. I'm like, dude, I just don't feel well. I think maybe because once you actually are like very healthy at a certain point in your life and you kind of step away from that, you see that disconnect. But unfortunately, a lot of people these days never even felt that kind of
That
euphoria to begin with. So they don't even have a reference point.
Yeah, that's you hit the nail right on the head. That is the difference. The difference is you had the experience of being, super healthy and you know what it felt like, right? And also, I would be willing to guess it was a pretty recent experience, right? So it wasn't that long before you were feeling bad that you felt really good. And because of, sort of that small gap in time, um, it's even more relatable, right? Because like if wellness was like 20 years ago for you, it wouldn't be as relatable to help you to make a change when you need to make a change, as opposed to it being, just 6 months ago you were in the best shape and doing all of the right things, and you're able to better relate to how you felt at that time,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, I don't know what the answer is. Like, how do you get beyond, the various levels? I mean, we could probably go all day with the different ways that people get disconnected from the truth. And, I guess we have to go find some sort of, spiritual guru to figure that out. But, I don't know the answer.
Well, I think I don't know the exact answer myself to side with you on that, but I think it's far easier than what people think. So
Yeah.
I'm not offering this as a solution for everyone or most people actually, but my grandma raised me off grid in Ukraine for the first 10 some years of my life. And she lived to be 87, basically without ever going to the hospital ever, period, in full health. And I think her husband died around 15 years before she died. So she was actually taking care of the ranch herself into the late 80s as well. So she was physically fit enough to be able to do that for the most part.
Wow, that's
And and it's very simple. She was like, out in nature all day, eating real food, drinking basically just nothing but water for the most part and some teas. Uh, there's very little electricity, almost none. So when it gets dark, you can't even see anything. You're in bed by like 8 p.m. You're sleeping by like 9 p.m. The ideal times are always generally accepted to sleep between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. for various reasons. And not dealing with traffic, not dealing with crazy city pollution, not dealing with a crazy overworked boss that's not healthy themselves, and you have to try to impress this person to be able to have your job. You can't say uh, no to this person. Well, you can. You know, no one's making you go back to work at the end of the day, obviously, except you yourself. But uh, I think it's just that. It's like if you live that kind of simple life that the human body has obviously evolved, you know, to some million years of evolution, 28 plus human species have come and gone to be able to develop the central nervous system we currently have, that functions in an environment not overburdened with micro stresses, out in nature, you know, eating real food.
Yeah.
And I think America is also like I think Western society in general is very addicted to complexity. Like, oh,
Yeah.
there's no way it can be that simple. Like all these biohacking experts, they say I have to take 50,000 supplements. And
But
all these anti-aging guys, although they look always like 20 years older than they actually are, I don't know how the hell people actually pay them for their anti-aging advice, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm like, dude, it's so simple. Like just master the freaking basics and do that every day consistently.
yeah.
And does that guarantee 100% that nothing's in it? No, but it is your best shot at, and it will dramatically decrease your chance of any sort of disease formation ever in your life. And you will be dramatically happier. I guarantee it. It's not going to solve all your problems, but it will solve a large percentage of them if you just live close to your core values, eat real food, use movement as medicine, sleep appropriately. If you hate your job, don't freaking work that job. Stop buying shit that keeps you in that job even longer.
Yeah.
You know, don't nest. It's okay to sometimes use it as a springboard to get to your next phase in life, but don't nest, especially when people are like, they don't like their job, it's stressful, but they try to reward themselves by financially buying in a super expensive car or house. I'm like, no, man, you should be using that excess money to get out of that situation, you know, like figuring out a way to uh,
It's like Europeans who take, they take a month off, for vacation, right? Unlike us as Americans, we're a week at a time at best, right? When we go somewhere and then we go to Disney World.
yeah,
Like,
and then
you
eating
know,
I like Disney, man, but they got to do something
I,
about their food. Their food shit, you know.
yeah, Europe's really cool too, right? To go, go to, I've been to Australia. That was amazing, right? Get out and see the world, right? See how other people live. It's like you were talking about with your grandma, right? There's all these blue zones that exist around the world where, it has, these are areas that have the most centenarians, right? So these are people that live beyond 100 years, and not just, numbers wise, they live well
Hmm.
for that entire time, right? Kind of like your grandma working on the farm all the way up until, she's in her late 80s, right? That's these places like Okinawa, Japan, for example. And when and when you look at their lifestyle, you realize it's exactly what you described, right? They're not in big city environments. They're not, they have, they're basically stress free, right? They live simple lives. Um, you look at someplace like France, right? There's always the big mystery about why the French can eat, tons of the most fatty foods and all of that and still be, relatively in shape and not, have the kind of obesity problems that we have, right? It's the same thing. They just don't accept stress in their lives, right? They don't accept, or if it does exist, they find ways to move away from it. Whether that means, they go on a month-long vacation to, a beach in Thailand or whatever it is to get beyond that. And we just, we're not built that way. That's not how we're taught. It's not what we learn. And so, we suffer the results of that. One of them is cancer, but even more than cancer is the degenerative diseases that people get, right? It's the heart disease, the diabetes, pre-diabetes, which is a huge problem here in the US.
Yeah,
right?
almost 50% of Americans are either type 2 diabetic
Right.
or pre-diabetic, which is
Yeah.
freaking crazy. And the craziest part, is that you chat to these people, they're like, I feel completely fine. I'm like, dude, what are you talking about, man? You're a disaster.
It's fine from their perspective.
Yeah,
because
of course.
before, right, they don't know what real wellness feels like. And so, I can be 30, 40 pounds overweight and feel completely fine because, that's what's normal to me. That's my norm, but they don't realize, they don't understand because they've never had the experience of being 10% body fat, right? And living a certain way and what you get out of that. And that's right there. That's what causes the disconnect.
Yeah.
That's what ends up happening. And that's how we get right back into this vicious cycle, right? Where, we end up with, because now we have all these problems that exist in the healthcare world that need to be handled, right? That need to be taken care of. And so, if that's where the demand is in healthcare, and there's no demand in keeping people well, right? Like people aren't, calling their doctor's offices and going, hey, how do I make sure that I don't, contract, pre-diabetes or become pre-diabetic? If there's no demand for that, and everything is, I just found out I'm diabetic, what medication should I go on? Then that's what they give you, right? It goes into the whole economic piece of it too, and so it's really going to take a whole mindset shift in order for things to really truly change. And what you're doing every day, I'm grateful for that, because that's the thing. It really, whenever mindset shifts need to happen, it's the things that like you do every day that chip away at that need, right? And make that, highlight it even more, right? So, it's good that you're doing what you're doing, because if you can just help one person sort of make that leap from that cognitive dissonance, right? And make the leap into, okay, maybe I feel well now, I feel okay, but wow, imagine how good I'd feel if I lost 20 pounds, right? And, that's what guys like you do. That's what, now a lot more people do because of COVID, right? So this is the optimistic piece. More and more fitness trainers are online. They're moving their businesses online, which means, even if you don't have the money to spend on an online fitness trainer, you can still come away with a lot of information that you wouldn't otherwise have, or that was, a lot harder to find before, right? And so, you just have to make the choice. You have to decide that your health, your well-being, your longevity, all of those things are important enough to you that you're going to make them a priority.
Yeah. And like at the end of the day, like what do you have when you don't have your mental or physical health? Like even if you're like for instance, I'm pretty sure it ran through your mind. You're like, well, shoot, if I lose this, I lose everything. When you got diagnosed with cancer,
Yeah, it ran through my mind, but at the same time, I think one of the things that I did really well was, and I do this with a lot of things in my life. I've had bad things happen to me, and one of the things that I've learned to do is to try to give, like, how like TV networks are supposed to give equal time, right, to each side of the political spectrum. Well, I try to give equal time to what are the potential positives to come out of a negative situation, right? So that's immediately what because I do that so often. When I got the cancer diagnosis, one of the, it wasn't right away, but within the first couple of days, I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, I wonder what my life is going to be like after this. And you know what? In a lot of ways, this is a good thing because, maybe this creates like a blank, you know what I mean? So, like, I was very quickly sort of finding this silver linings. And you would think most people would say, oh my God, what kind of silver lining can you find in cancer? But, it for me, it was like the lifestyle changes. It was the fact that, well, I really believe that the stressors that were in my life at the time were what caused the problem in the first place. And this is going to give me an opportunity to clear that away and to start with a blank slate. And I got excited about that immediately within 24 hours, right? Of, once you get past the initial shock and everything. And that to me is like, if you could train your brain, if you can train yourself to do that, even when let's say you get fired from a job, right? I'm guessing while, HR is handing you that severance pay, you're not thinking, well, one door closes, another one opens, right? But that's absolutely how you should be thinking,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, oh my God, this is great. This is forcing me into what's next in my life, right? And that chapter is going to be 10 times better than the last.
Yeah.
And if we can train ourselves to think from that perspective, then our logical minds go, okay, well, what do I need to do to achieve that? And maybe one of the things that you need to do is to get well, right? And what does get well mean? Get well is physically, mentally, get enough sleep, eat well. It's all of those things. And so, I think if we can, if maybe the way to start in terms of getting past that disconnect, maybe the way to start is by finding the silver lining, right? Or in training ourselves to do that. Because it's not, I get that it's not easy for most people to do. Again, I was fortunate because I was already that way. But that is not the way most people are, right? Most people just sort of wallow in that, woe is me, oh, I can't believe this happened, why me, all of that. They wallow in that, and that just makes things worse.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
know?
Have you thought of moving out of the city after all this is
Oh,
up?
absolutely, I've thought of it 100 times. Um, and, I
Because I know
haven't,
personally, LA always gave me anxiety when I was driving through there. I never lived there. I lived the closest I've lived there was like Big Bear, Irvine,
right.
those areas. But just driving to hang out with some friends or go to a convention in LA, I'm like, dude, this is already like increasing my blood pressure quite a bit, just like having to drive through this city.
You're increasing my blood pressure just talking about
Yeah.
it. No, but for me, it's not as much of an issue because again, I now work in a job where it's it's almost 100% from home.
Yeah, that's cool.
I've built myself a great little nest. My gym's not that far away. And I don't have to go far every day, right? So I don't get necessarily that big city experience, but for, maybe a couple of minutes of every day. So you know, but yeah, like someday I would love to, I sort of dream about having like, one of these awesome prefab homes and, out in the desert somewhere or near the beach or whatever. Um, but, uh, but, for me, it's like, again, it's making the best out of the situation that you're in, right? And that's what I chose to do, at least for the time being, with my living situation. It's like, you know, I don't have to live in LA. I actually sell solar now, and believe it or not, it's almost all virtual because of COVID. So if I have a sales meeting, it's on Zoom. So I could live anywhere. I could live in Guadalajara, Mexico, if I wanted to. But just I don't need to. I've created a nice little bubble that that I can I can stay in. I've got my dogs, and I've got friends, and I like it here.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, shoot, I got caught up with listening to your story of, oh, yes, about remote work. I always tell like people, if you could work remotely, like do it. It will, because oftentimes, I mean, it varies from person to person depending on the level of their commute, but you're looking on average of saving like around like 5 to 8 hours a week of driving.
Yeah.
And that's more than enough time to like, you need like basically an average person. I'm not talking about like a person that's trying to get to the Olympics, needs like 10 hours, 11 hours a week to really optimize their aesthetics and health. It really
Right.
doesn't take that much more time than that, it's like 5 hours of workouts and then like 5 or 6 hours of all the background stuff to be able to sustain those workouts. And it's like, just by working remote, you free up just that amount of time. So as long
It,
as you're in the mindset of taking care of yourself, now all of a sudden you
it's
have
like
all the time in the world to do it.
it takes away that big excuse that you hear in the fitness industry all the time, which is, oh, I don't have time for that. I
Yeah.
don't have time to go to the gym, right? Or I don't have time to do this. I don't have time to do that. Yeah. I mean, when you work from home, my commute is, I don't know, 35 seconds
Yeah. I like how
from
you
my,
calculated it. Like, how many steps do I need to take to get downstairs?
right? So, I no longer have that excuse that maybe I had in the past of, I don't have time for HIIT classes, or for lifting or whatever. You get all of that back.
Yeah.
But even more than just, the what you get back in terms of your fitness and having more time for fitness, it's all the other things too, right? We know sleep is important, right? Well, because I don't have to commute anywhere, I probably get an extra hour's sleep as everybody else, right?
Hmm.
Which means that it's easier for me to get that 7 or 8 hours that you really need to stay well. Um, you know, there's the whole thing about, not having the stress of being in traffic, right? And so I saved myself the potential of getting, pissed off because somebody cut me off on the 101 freeway, right? Because I'm not driving on the 101 freeway, right? So yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's silly that there's all these companies like, Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk wanting everybody to go back to the office and
I find
all.
the irony, especially with Musk doubling down. I don't know if he's like wanting 100% of the people to return. I don't know the details. I'm just kind of presuming here, so I could be completely wrong. But presuming he wants 100% of the people to return to the job, I find like a little bit of irony in that, because he's the one that wants to go to Mars, and it's like the most remote job ever. I'm like, dude, you should be the most pro remote guy, period. And creating all sorts of technology to make it happen. Especially if you want to like start colonizing other planets. I mean, that's the most
And
remote idea,
I,
period.
the guy who's creating the metaverse, right? Like, and Facebook is such a huge online platform, but yet, somehow you can't do your meetings over Zoom for some reason. I don't get it. I don't
Yeah.
get it. And again, it goes back to the whole system, right? That we get so comfortable in what it is that we already know and what we're used to, that it's very hard for us to change.
Yeah.
And so it takes a pandemic um, for it to become, for even working at home to become more normalized, right? And it shouldn't take a pandemic for that. It should be enough that you get these added benefits out of it. And come on, if I'm able to sleep an extra hour, how much more productive am I going to be, right? If I'm able to, take an hour and a half at lunch as opposed to just an hour to run to the nearest Chipotle and make myself a healthy lunch, or go to the gym during, down the street during lunch hour, right? If I'm able to do that, as opposed to, what I would have to do if I were sitting at the office and, ordering in every day, which makes me unhealthier, then, how much more productive would I be? So it seems to me like you just get that's why I don't get their approach, right? Like, okay, everybody back to the office. No, it's the opposite. Let's stay home.
I
Right?
just figured, like, even if there are no other benefits, just the benefit of not having to deal with social politics is already like a win for me. I'm like, dude, just even if I don't get any other benefits and somehow I still have to do all those things, just the fact of not having to deal with social politics and the various personalities of like office work, for example, it is actually very energy draining to deal with that. Like, you got to adjust your personality to communicate with this person. Now you got to adjust it slightly more to communicate with this type of person. Now this person came in a bit moody. I got to adjust for that. It's actually like, it's daunting, especially when you're dealing with deadlines and kids at home and whatever else you got going on in your life. It all adds up, man. And people have just normalized that. Like we mentioned, I'm like, it's not normal and it's not healthy for you to have all that burden on your like physical and your mental state. It's like 24/7, because even when you're driving to work, you're thinking about it. When you're driving back from work, you're still thinking about it. You can't get good night's sleep because your mind is racing from what happened during that day. It's like, it affects you 24 hours of the day, 7 days a week to some degree.
And to be clear, a lot of that doesn't go away just because you're working from home.
True.
Right? But again, it's a matter of percentages, right? It's like everything else. Even with the cancer discussion, right? All of those things. It really does come down to percentages. When we were talking about cancer, it's how stressed are you? How much focus do you put on that stress? How much do you worry? And if you can minimize worry, does that minimize your susceptibility of getting unwell, right? The same thing with this, right? It's, if I can get an extra hour of sleep and that makes me X% healthier and more able to deal with the politics and things like that, and then I get an extra little percent here because I'm not having to deal with the water cooler politics, right? Then we're moving in the right direction. I just don't understand, and God, I mean, there's so many, I've owned businesses before. I know how much it costs to, rent space.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that too. I'm like, these huge buildings, man. I mean, I did train, I'm not going to mention which company, but I did train like an executive from like a popular car brand. And this was even before COVID. And he was already initiating a lot of steps to get people that could work remote, just go work remote. And they kind of subleased the space in the office to other companies, and dramatically decrease their expenses by simply doing that, or just downsize to like a smaller office. And he was like all about it. But you kind of rarely, especially that was like 2018, it was way before. He was like, I feel like way ahead of.
Yeah. My company's the same way. It's we're a solar platform as opposed to a solar company. So there's, I think, easily 7,000 of us in the company, and we don't have an office anywhere. There's no office, So I mean, it can be. It just goes to show it can be done, right? And imagine if you had to, have an office for 7,000 people. I mean, what would that cost? And then you're just sort of adding on to the stress of everybody else, and contributing to the overall problems. I really believe so. I love
it's not a belief, it's like a fact. It's like, first of all, you're not doing any work when you're driving to work. Like, you get to work, you chit chat for like 30-40 minutes or get your coffee. That no work is being accomplished there. Then it's like you get 2 good hours in and it's lunch. And then you
Yeah.
come back from lunch, you chit chat again. It takes you like an hour to get back into the flow of things. You get a good 2 hours in, you go home. And once again, you're not doing any work when you're driving home and stuck in traffic and pissed off that you're stuck in traffic and not having more free time to yourself.
And then when you go out to lunch, you get shit food, and
Yeah, there's that aspect too. So
you're,
it's
you're you know,
disaster.
yeah, yeah.
But I
It's
always say sick people can't make healthy decisions or they wouldn't be sick. And I feel like a lot of management is just not health. They're basically 99% of them aren't health conscious. They're like pretty much a disaster, like mentally and physically for the most part, just being
right.
held up by like a myriad of pharmaceutical drugs and bad diets and alcohol on the weekend.
Well, that goes to community, right? Because if sick people can't make healthy decisions, then it takes help from other people, right? Whether that be your work, your boss, your family, your friends, or whatever. And that's another thing where we sort of fall short, because we don't, you know, I don't know if we feel like it's none of our business or whatever, but we don't generally go to our, go to our friends and family and say, hey, I, I see you're not getting enough sleep. How can I help you to change that, right? Or offer solutions that potentially could help. And maybe we need a little bit more of that too.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Rob, thanks for being a guest. If there are any other topics you want to touch on, I'm happy to kind of
Yep.
explore. But I think you did a good rundown, and especially like I feel like a good rundown of what you can do to just prevent the issue from arising to begin
Right.
with. And I
Yeah.
know a lot of people are going to listen to it, and just like you mentioned before in earlier in the interview, and they're going to get it intellectually. It's not that complicated to understand intellectually, but
Right.
that talking does nothing. It's doing the work every day, doing that and actually making it happen is what gives the results. Like uh, the old saying, it's knowledge isn't power. Like applied knowledge is power.
Right.
That's where
I,
anyone can be a good coffee shop talk, coffee
yeah.
shop talk guy. But
I love
very few people can do that. So
I love that. Well, and again, it's the thing I would sort of leave you with is that if you can't get there yourself, right? If you can't make those leaps on your own, you've got to figure out a way to ask for help, right?
yeah,
So whether that's hiring a fitness trainer or, even just talking to your best friend, right? And saying, this is what's going on and I need help, right? Again, another thing we don't do well in this country. People are too proud and, asking for help is just not, people
I
think it's,
personally loved hiring mentors throughout my life too. If you
yeah,
find the right one, they fast track your success in whatever you're trying to get good at. Like it'll
absolutely.
take you 10 or 15 years of intense study to accomplish what you can do in just like 6, 12 months with their help.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And to be fair, I don't think people have as much trouble finding like professional mentors. That's fine. People will ask for that kind of help. But when it comes to health issues, for example, or wellness or whatever, people are, oh, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm
Yeah.
doing. I know what I'm doing with
They can't
my,
even fix their car. And they're like, well, I can't fix my car, so I'm going to take it to a mechanic because I don't know what I'm doing. But all of a sudden, with the human body and mind, that's far more complicated than a freaking automobile. Oh, all
right.
of a sudden, I know what I'm doing and I'm
Yeah,
doing well.
I know.
Well, actually, if they knew what they're doing, why are 9 out of 10 American adults metabolically unhealthy? Okay,
Right.
well, because they don't know what they're doing. End of story.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So the more we can sort of, get to that paradigm where, people are looking out for themselves, looking out for number one, taking care of themselves and asking for help when they need it, to kind of push past that cognitive dissonance that we talked about, everybody's better off, I
Yeah.
think, even systematically, even though, overall. So,
Well, what's the best piece of advice you would give, let's say yourself 10 years ago, that's working out and being quote unquote healthy, and you're telling them, you got to change these things, man, or this is what's going to happen. Because I know at one point I was also like, I considered myself a very fit looking sick person. I
Right.
went to the gym and I worked out, and I actually looked very fit on the outside. But inside, when I was working 6 days a week and just not really living true to my core values and interests, I just felt always anxious, not getting the best sleep, and um, always rushed. And honestly, like I mentioned, I didn't even develop like serious health problems, but even those minor red flags were enough to be like, this is going to go down a bad path if I continue this for a very long time.
I would tell myself, I would tell my 10-year ago self, the biggest advice I would give him is I would say, you need to put just as much emphasis and focus on your mental health as you do your physical health, right? So all this time that you're spending in the gym, all this time that you're spending with trainers, all this time you're spending, counting calories and macros and everything else, what are you doing to make sure your stress is minimized, to make sure that you're happy, content, right? Are you meditating every day? Are you looking for ways to, keep yourself and keep your, their mental well-being where it needs to be? Whether that's a daily spiritual practice or whatever people will use, whatever method you have, it could even be your religion, right? Whatever it is, but are you putting as much focus and emphasis on that as what you are on the outside? So even what you were just saying, Eugene, about you feeling, looking good on the outside but being a sick person on the inside. I mean, that's to me exactly an example of what I'm talking about, right? Because what it says is maybe you weren't putting the amount of emphasis that you needed to change the dynamics of the situation, which caused you to get less sleep,
Mm-hmm.
caused you to be stressed, which caused you to be unwell inside. And that's the thing that I know I miss. 100% I missed the target on that. 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if I could change anything, that's what I would do. I would go back and I would make sure that, you know, that I sort of had that, like, that almost kind of like an attitude adjustment, right?
Yeah.
And, and I think that would have changed everything, right? Maybe I wouldn't have ended up with cancer if I
Yeah.
had a.
Cool. Well, honestly, thank you for coming on the podcast. You're my first attempt at this because, like I mentioned, it's usually me doing like a solo cast and just kind of talking about a random topic or interviewing a past client about their experience. So this
Yeah.
is actually like really cool, and I enjoyed hearing your story. And studying cancer has always been an interest of mine. I always say like, oh, I'm going to put more effort into it. I might put a little bit more effort into it in the new year, just because it's so common. It's tough, like to run into uh, with 50% of Americans developing cancer in their lifetime now. Like I've
Yeah.
had a few people in my close circle that have unfortunately passed away from it. And you would have never thought growing up with them, that's going to happen. You just like never think that, you know what I mean? And
Yeah. But at the end of the day, I think it's also important to mention that cancer isn't the death sentence it used to be, right?
mhm,
And so I hope I'm living proof of that, right? That you can come away even better than you were before, right? If you make the right decisions, if you go through it with the right attitude, and and so as much as cancer does, and will continue to affect people, um, as long as we're making the right choices for ourselves, it it might not even end up being as big of an issue as you think it would.
yeah, cool.
You know?
But small caveat, that doesn't mean people can still live like a dumbass because they're going to have
No, of
some
course.
scapegoat to help them like 20 years from now when they do get cancer. So let's just make that clear, okay?
Yeah,
Like the best thing you can do for yourself is just stop being a dummy, stop, hurting yourself and living a life of pathology and just normalizing it at the end of
yeah,
the day.
for sure. It's all true. It's
So,
it's all the truth, right? And again, it's just about coming um, to the right spot in your thinking, And I think if you can do that, you're going to live a happy, healthy life for a long time.
Cool. Okay, well, thank you again, and for everyone that jumped on. It was good to see you guys, and have a good weekend, everyone.
You too.
Okay.
Thanks
All right.
again.
Thank you. Good luck.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning into the podcast. If you've ever had trouble losing weight, or you've lost weight, but still didn't have the ideal body or health you're aiming for, please feel free to reach out anytime and book an assessment. Eugene will work with you to cover your goals in detail, see what's holding you back, and go from there. In the meantime, feel free to check out the countless testimonials on Eugene's website in the link below. In the testimonial section, you'll notice everyone has various backgrounds, are of all different ages, and all have had different challenges in their life, but they all have one thing in common: they were all able to find their health and achieve their ideal body. You're also welcome to add yourself to the Facebook group in the link below. There you'll have access to the live videos that Eugene does weekly on Sundays, and other helpful content. Thank you again for tuning in.